We kind of live in a pretty funky time. Like today we said Happy Mother's Day. We talked about whether or not we should call this Happy Birthing Person's Day. We did not really. And what in the world are we doing? And the security team called me and said, hey, do you think we're going to have issues on Sunday? I mean, as a society, regardless of where you fall on the abortion topic, celebrating some medical procedure yay, is super weird. We don't do that in any other medical procedure. Nobody's like, hey, I had to have eye surgery. You're like, oh, awesome, I'm so happy for you. And hey, I have back surgery or open heart surgery. You're like, woohoo, let's go. So weird, such a weird time to live in. And I remember when I was a young man, my mom who used to say to me that the world is only going to get worse. And I was like, you're just crazy. And she was right. And so then you think about what the world's going to be like in 30 years. How many just go, just thinking about what's coming down the road? Goodness. And we just live in really funky times. And part of the reason why we're watching this unfold is our culture is losing the sense of a common culture that underpins general ideas. We were a Christian nation, not that everyone was Christian, but we had common ideas about the way the world works. And those were ideas that were based on Christianity. And so ideas like what is the nature of evil and where does each evil come from? There is each major world religion has different ideas behind the nature of evil and where evil comes from. And we were built on a Christian nation, which meant that we believed evil came from a person's heart, and we had a propensity to do evil. And that's why we have kind of the system of government that has checks and balances. It's not random. It's based on a philosophy that led a particular direction. And so we're kind of moving away from that as a culture. And as we do, you can expect to find, different breakdowns in society. And one of the things about, and certainly about being kind of Texan, is there's this mixture of Christianity and politics. It all kind of goes together. And so sometimes we have this tendency to think that cultural values are Christian. And so we normalize common American cultural values. And some of those cultural values are kind of nice and they work, and they were kind of Judeo-Christian in essence, and some of them are not. And I want to talk this morning about a cultural value. I'm going to build a case and then we're going to get there. I'm going to talk about a cultural value that has been handed to our moms, and that is, I think, pretty debilitating and pretty dangerous, and can really lead to kind of brokenness and a very difficult parenting structure and a philosophy of life. And so we're going to look at that, and we're going to pull that out of a story in the Old Testament in 1 Kings chapter 17. And so I'm also want to be sensitive this morning to the idea that we are at this day because of a calendar. Like the calendar tells us this is Mother's Day. And you may not, Mother's Day may be this really fun day, and your husband takes you out for lunch. Hint, hint. And, they make a nice meal, or maybe you get some chocolate or some flowers or there's some way that you're honored, and that's nice. And Mother's Day, and your kids, they still talk to you and they like you. And so that's good. And so Mother's Day is good. But for some of our audience, Mother's Day is not their favorite day of the year. And I want to be sensitive to that. We've got moms, people that are here whose mom has already passed. So Mother's Day has this weighty tinge to it because they miss their mom. They miss the smell of their mom's house and some cooking that she did and the advice that she would give and just the sound of her voice and some of that relationship. And so Mother's Day is a hard day. And then others, moms have had children and their children, maybe their lives are kind of broken, and so that relationship isn't really what it needs to be. And so Mother's Day has some kind of weight to it there. Some moms have lost children who prematurely passed, and so their hearts kind of get pulled into sadness. And so, to me, it's really an interesting kind of idea, because I don't want to get up and be like, "Yay, moms!" when some section of our audience really struggles with this being a great day. And so, regardless of how you experience this day, I want you to know that we love you and that we're going to walk life with you, that this day is, it's a wonderful day, then you'll come off. If it's a tough day, then you'll come up from there. And so I want to speak into that as we walk into this story. I did say I was going to talk about Jezebel. I'm just going to reference Jezebel because the story that we're talking about in 1 Kings chapter 17 is this moment in the history of Israel where it's been divided into two nations, David and then Solomon. And after the death of Solomon, there's a civil war. Two tribes, Benjamin and Judah, form what is in Scripture called Judah, the nation of Judah. And then 10 tribes combine and they form what is called Samaria, or often called Israel. There's occasionally good kings in the southern two tribes, Judah. There's kings, and we define them as good if they serve and honor God. And then in the northern tribes, there are never any kings that wholly serve God, that deal with the idolatry that's in the region at the time. And Elijah and Elisha are living at that period of time. We're going to deal with Elijah. And Elijah is dealing with a king named Ahab. And Ahab is a bad king. He marries a woman named Jezebel. There you go. Jezebel is from a region called Phoenicia, which is on the Mediterranean Sea, on the coastal in the Mediterranean Sea. And her father is the ruler of that region. And that part of the world is kind of a center for a religious structure that includes what's called a god called Baal, B-A-A-L. Baal's father's name is El. And you remember we did the names of God, El, or Elohim. Elohim is the plural of El. That is not a unique name for God. And so it just means that he is the most majestic one. And so in the worship of Baal, you've got El, which is Baal's father. Baal is actually dead. Living in the netherworld, dead living, but he's dead. He's the god of fertility, and so he's worshipped as the god of fertility. And he essentially makes crops grow. His job is to make sure that your farm animals bear young and that you have children in your household. That's their job, but he's dead. And so he can't do his job, so he can't send rain because he's dead. And what happened to him is he lost all of his blood, and so he needs blood in order to come back to life. And if he comes back to life, then he can make it rain or whatever. And so he can cause there to be a bounty. And so they developed a system of child sacrifices. And so they would kill essentially their firstborn. They would kill their firstborn. And in killing their firstborn, that was a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice to Baal. How many firstborns are pretty happy that we don't have that practice? And then I think, how many non-firstborn really wish we had that practice? And my mind gets really confused and all that. And tell them I said hi. And they're just calling to wish you happy Mother's Day. I always called my mom during church because then I knew it wouldn't be a long, drawn-out discussion. I don't know. Somebody's got to answer it or shut it off. It's coming again. I don't know where it's coming from. Do you remember that time when we had that high-pitched sound and I couldn't keep preaching because the high-pitched sound was so high? Yeah, it messes with my head. So Baal is dead and he gets blood, pumped into him when you kill people. And so Elijah is essentially preaching about Jehovah, Yahweh, and there's essentially these stories that are going through the Old Testament in which they're demonstrating the power of God over Baal. Elijah goes to King Ahab and says in the beginning of chapter 17, it is not going to rain for 3 years. No matter what you do, doesn't matter what you try, Elijah is going to show the power of God over Baal by not allowing the worship of Baal to have any appearance of effectiveness. That is, he is going to prove it's not going to rain. Actually, after 3.5 years, he's going to get up, pray, it's going to rain immediately, proving the power of God over Baal. So Ahab has gone to, Elijah's gone to Ahab and told Ahab it's not going to rain. God says to Elijah, sends him to the side of a creek, a brook, the brook Cherith, and said he will take care of him there. And so he eats there, and God sends birds that feed him. And so he eats there for a while until that dries up. When that brook dries up, God comes to Elijah and he sends him to a town called Zarephath. The town of Zarephath is in the under the political umbrella of Jezebel's father. So essentially, God sends his servant, who Ahab is trying to find and kill, to what would be the lion's den, what would be the worst possible place for him to go. And God says, I'm going to provide for you there. There is a lady there who's going to take care of you. Now, we don't know a lot about her. We're not introduced to her name. We know a couple of things. First of all, her life is immensely complex. She's a widow in a time where women typically were not allowed to own private property. So she's essentially some version of a beggar. She has her husband's home, but that can be taken away. It's very complex for her at this period of time. She's lost her spouse, she's a widow, and she has a child, a young child. We don't know how old, but the child is young enough to be carried around. So there's a young child that she's responsible for, and she's living in this place which is really quite decadent. We also know that she's experienced a time of social and economic ruin. There is no rain in an agrarian society. There's really no means of wealth, and she's absolutely destitute. And we also know that her understanding of God, of who God is and how God relates, is all messed up. Let's look at her story in 1 Kings chapter 17. We're going to start at verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him, that's Elijah, arise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, which is on Phoenicia, which is on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. And so he's supposed to go and find a widow. That's the only description that he gets. He's supposed to define a widow. And this widow, and again, he's going to a place that they don't like him. This widow is supposed to take care of him. So he's got to try to find her. Verse 10. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was gathering sticks. So she's doing menial work, and she would be identified as a widow by her clothing, and he would be identified as a prophet by his clothing. And he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I might drink, which is a socially acceptable thing, a cultural thing for him to ask. It's not rude at all. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. Now, we're very American, and so we hear this thing, and immediately we think, get your own bread. Like, what in the world? I don't know who you are. You already asked me for water. You want to make a meal for you? Are you out of your mind? Like, we do not do that. Thankfully, we do not do that. But in this time, this would be a socially acceptable thing for him to do, and it would be acceptable for him to ask, and it would be expected of her that she would repay, that she would do that. Like, it would be normal for her to give something to him. So that this is not rude behavior. He's not being kind of overbearing. This is a normally accepted kind of action. And so he said, hey, I'm hungry. Would you bring me something? And I'm thirsty. Would you bring me some water? She's going to get some water, and he says, hey, I'm hungry. Bring me some food. Nicer than that, but that's essentially what he's doing. Verse 12. And she said, as the Lord your God lives. So the word Lord is all capitalized, so it's Yahweh. As Yahweh, your Elohim. Yahweh, your God, the God that you worship, as the Lord your God, not mine, yours, as the Lord your God lives. And now she's going to tell a story, but she's identifying herself as distinct from his faith structure. And now she, again, lives in the place where Baal worship is dominant. And she's speaking to the prophet of God. And so she identifies that, and she says, as the Yahweh, your Elohim lives, she says, I have nothing baked. I don't have anything in the pantry. There's no food, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks and that I may go and prepare it for myself and my boy, that we can eat it, and then I got nothing. We're going to have a last meal, and we're going to die. And Elijah says to her, now Elijah, like, how many of you think of yourself generally as a compassionate person? Like, you generally think of yourself as, like, I'm a compassionate person. Okay, good. The rest of you just hate people. Someone's starving to death. You're like, good, but for me, don't burn all the sticks. Like, what? What are you going to do with that empty container? We've got a lot. What? I don't know what you do. But so, like if somebody says, and they weren't like a person that was going to, purchase an illegal substance or something like that. They weren't addicted to something they're going to waste. But if they say something like, I've got $2 to my name and I have no way of sustaining myself, and it's a real story. Like, you wouldn't say, well, give me $1.25 and we'll be all good. You wouldn't ask for some of that. But that's what Elijah does. In verse 13, Elijah said to her, do not fear, go and do as you have said, but first, and I don't know if he means by that go and die, but I don't know what that means, but he says, but first make a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterwards make for yourself and your son. He's like, yeah, I get it, all that, but go make me a meal with whatever you got left. Give me part of it, and then you can eat your meal and die. Now, he's going to keep talking, so this story isn't over. But right now, like, how many of you, if this story ends, how many just want to go to heaven and then find Elijah, just punch him? Just be like, you're such a jerk. How could you ask for that? But he knows the ending of this story. He says, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent. The jug of oil shall not be empty until the day the Lord, Yahweh, again capitalized, shall return rain upon the earth. And so he basically says, she says, Yahweh, your Elohim, like, I don't have anything. And then Elijah says, Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, is going to provide for you until Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, the God of Israel, until that Yahweh causes it to rain again. Basically, Elijah sets this up against this woman and says, God is going to prove himself and take care of you. And she went, verse 15, this is a display of her faith. She went and did as Elijah said. She and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of oil was not spent, neither did the jug of the jar of flour, neither the jug of oil became empty according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. And so, I don't know how this happened. Jesus made, 5 loaves and 2 fishes, feed 5,000 plus. And so, I don't exactly know how this happens. Me personally, I would have stayed up all night looking at the jug to see when it filled up. I think, how did this happen? But God caused the flour and the oil never to run out through the course of the entire window of time that it didn't rain. God provided for this broken woman through Elijah. God provided for this woman whose life was chaotic and was living in utter mess. God provided specially for her. And so for the rest of the time that everyone else was struggling with food, she and her family had enough. And this is this beautiful, amazing, wonderful, image of God's provision and God's supply, and it is such a cool story. And if the story ended there, we could celebrate with this woman, but that is not the end of the story. Here, this woman's problem, how am I going to feed my family? I have nothing, is taken away and resolved. And I cannot imagine how overjoyed she was every day coming out with more and enough to supply for her family. But the story doesn't end there. The story doesn't finish. Sometime after Elijah's still living there. They had houses with guest rooms they would put on the second floor, and there was an external staircase you could climb up and go to the house, and that's where Elijah would stay in their home. Elijah was staying with this woman, and God miraculously was providing, and then she was taking care of the prophet. Some point of time in this window, her son dies. You ever get this spot in your life where it's a mess, and then it seems like miraculously everything just kind of works itself out, and it's just, man, I cannot believe all of this is going to work, and here it is in this perfect little picture, in this perfect little box, and great, and then a short while later, all of that just comes imploding down. Here is this woman who's literally going to starve to death with her son. God miraculously supplies for her, and then afterwards, he gets sick and dies. This broken woman reveals a little bit about her theology and a little bit about her heart when she comes in brokenness and confronts Elijah. She says, verse 17, after this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. And his illness was so severe that there was no breath in him. And she comes to Elijah, and she's like, what are you doing? Why would you do this? What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son. That is, you're bringing out the stories and the failure of my past. And the story and failure of my past is bringing me to this calamity. That as you're bringing out my sin has got me to this spot. I've told you a number of times that I was not particularly prepared or ready to handle the idea of being a dad. I just worked a lot. Michelle did way more than I should have done more. And but they just make lots of messes, and it's a little weird for me. So I remember when Michelle was pregnant with our oldest, we were talking one day, and she said something like, I'm reading all these books on what to expect from pregnancy, but I'm fixing to go to the hospital, have a baby, and I got to come home, and I've got to take care of this. I don't even know what. And Mom, you're pregnant, and the baby grows inside of you, and kicks your bladder all the time, and it's all this great time, this is good, and then you have this baby. And you bring this baby home, and you're left with this idea. I have to take care of this. And I don't want to screw it up. So first-time moms, they're a little freaky, right? They're a little weird. Try to stay away from them for sure. And they're a little weirded out. Sometimes when they get to second and third, they're not quite as weirded out. But they're left with this sense of, I have to take care of this. And if I don't take care of this, something terrible is going to happen. And so you stumble through life. And you stumble day by day by day by day, trial and error, picking and choosing. And you just own this idea that I have to take care. And the fact is, you do. You can take that away. And then what happens is there's this merging, I think. There's this merging of physical care into projected behavioral care. And there's this idea in modern American thought, and it's certainly in the church. It's called, essentially called determinism, which means that where I am today is a direct reflection of the things that I did before. And if I can manage the things that I'm doing now, I can control the outcome. And that's what she's saying. She's saying, my son is dead because of the sins of my past. The stuff that I did back there has gotten me here. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that stuff. That's parental, that's determinism. And for whatever, as a society, we've handed that off to our moms. And we do it in church all the time. And so our moms are weighted with this idea or crushed when it doesn't turn out. They're weighted with this idea that if I just do it perfectly, if I just do it right, if I just manage myself properly, if I can just control the variables, if I could just make sure they've got good friends, if I could just make sure that they learn this lesson, if I could just make sure that I don't do this, if I could just make sure my husband doesn't do that, if I can just manage all of these things, I can make sure this kid turns out. And so this wonderful journey that you're on of discovering and unpacking the story of your life is wrecked with this idea that you, in fact, in some way are responsible. I think a large part, not all, but I think a large part of the drive to homeschool. I'm not speaking against homeschooling. I think a large part of the drive to homeschool comes out of determinism, which is if I can make sure my kids aren't exposed to this, or I can make sure that they don't have this happen to them, if I can make sure I can manage all of these things, I can keep them from doing, and then the list of the things that we don't want them to do, and I can create an outcome. And we put this sense of shame and guilt and unrealistic expectations on our moms because sometimes God directs and there's a tender heart and a child turns out and it turns out really well, and then sometimes in the exact same family you have a little I don't know what word I only thought of hellion, so I don't know what other what happened? And so the mom will live with shame. The mom will feel guilt. Feel guilt. She'll feel like she should back away, that she has nothing to say because her kids didn't turn out this way, or her marriage didn't turn out this way, or this didn't happen. So who could hear from me? As if she's managing and controlling. And I get how we got there, because we gave you a baby and said, if you don't feed it, it's not going to make it. You're going to determine whether it lives or dies. And so then we just translated that into their character and into their godliness, and we said, hey, if you take them to church and if you do these things and if you don't do these things, you're going to make sure that they turn out just like this. And that's the theology that this lady's got. I am in this calamity. We are in this calamity. The reason my kids they're not going to church is because I. Now, we influence, but we do not determine. Well, and the reason my kids are addicted to substance abuse is because, and we list some sin that we did as if we manage them in some way. That we determine who and what they are. This story in Elijah ends, it's one of those weird kind of like, I don't understand any of that stuff, but like Elijah goes and picks up the boy. Verse 9, takes his son, takes him in his arms, so he carries the boy and takes him up, would have gone outside up to his room, and he lays him out on his bed, and he prays over him, and he calls out to God, and he lays next to him, kind of holds him, and he prays over him 3 different times, and God chooses to raise the boy from the dead, and the child lives. And then he brings him back downstairs, and verse 24, the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are the man or the messenger of Elohim, and that the word of Yahweh in your mouth is truth. So she identifies herself now as a worshiper and follower of Yahweh. And the inclusion of this story in the Old Testament is the demonstration of God's power over Baal. And this woman has this moment where she identifies and becomes an active worshiper of Yahweh. This story shows the care of God and the compassion of God, and illustrates God's care for a woman in the worst of all circumstances. I'm gonna give 3 kind of unrelated points, but I'm gonna finish with that in a second. I just want to stop, and I want to speak to the moms who have been given, or you took, determinism. The answer to determinism is grace. Grace says that every standing that I have, every blessing that we have, is a reflection of God's favor. God chose to give it. It's not because you earned it. It's not because you're amazing. I know you are. It's not because you're the perfect mom. So it's not that you could look and say, I want more blessing for my children so I can procure more favor by performing more deeds. The answer is grace. The answer is to look at the story of our life when our influence was probably not always consistent with the character that we want to show today, and apply grace to the wound of our own heart. And to say the person I am is a reflection of the work of God in my life, and I can do good not because I am good, but because God is working a good work in me. It's grace. And the answer to the mom who is struggling because their child didn't exactly turn out like they thought that they were trying to influence their child to turn out is not shame, is not to withdraw from community. The answer is grace. The answer is to identify that every good thing that occurs in my life is an expression of God's blessing based on the work of Christ on the cross. You can be the perfect parent, whatever that is, and rear crazy children. I have seen it endlessly. And if you haven't seen it, you have too small of a circle. Go meet some other people. Or go talk to your kids' friends. Because they might not be quite as perfect as you think they are. So I want to finish. Eeks, I'm late. So we have nothing but Mother's Day plans. I want to finish with just a short little conversation. I want to give 3 things that I think. I'm going to speak for women today. Oh, it's my great joy of life. I will do that, and everyone will be so happy. But I want to talk about, so I don't necessarily think that women are that complex. I don't understand them, but I don't think they're that complex. Like, I understand how they get to where they're at. I just can't think their thoughts, and so I can't think like them. Like I mean, I've told you this, guys, before, I think, but men have, when in the womb, men and women are different. Marvel thought, men and women are different. One of the differences in the womb, when testosterone is introduced to the baby, it burns the connectors between the left and right hemisphere of their brain. And so men literally have brain damage. And we are incapable of thinking like you think. So we can kind of try to understand stuff, but we do not think the world the way you think. You have a much larger view of the world. We have a much simpler, smaller view of the world, and men typically do, and how they process information is much more simple. And that's not news to anyone sitting here today. No, not at all. And so very different. So I want to kind of summarize, if I could, really, for husbands and for young men. If you're developing and you say, one day I'd like to be married, and that would be nice, and I like girls and all that stuff, so I'm going to help you. There's really 3 things I think that women want and will greatly simplify the story of their life. One is they want someone to marry someone and to be with someone who works hard, who understands what hard work is. Not just at work, but also at home. And that it's not hard for them to work. Now, typically, women don't need a lot of money, and then all the women are like, what are you talking about? And typically, women don't need a lot of money. What they need is to know that their husband works hard, and that he is committed to being to greatness, that he's not jumping from job to job, and he's just like, I hate my boss, I hate my boss. Just go be great at something. Go figure it out and be great at something, and take care and provide an environment. And it's not just at work. Don't come home and then like giving commands at home. It's like, you're the boss. And don't do that, but come home and work hard. And so I think that greatly simplifies how a lady experiences the story of her life. Secondly is learn what it means to honor your wife well and to love her well and to love her children well. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, it gives a command to husbands that they are to dwell with their wife according to knowledge. And the phrase according to knowledge means that you would study her enough, and the assumption is to make practical application out of the study. And so the idea would be that you would study your wife, how she responds to things and how she takes the rhythms of her life and how she takes the ups and downs of the story of her life. You would study her well enough to know how to express honor and how to express love to her and provide that. Like that's the command in 1 Peter. And so like for the young men, like your brain is likely not ever going to get to the spot where you can think kind of with her and her thoughts. She has a much larger scope of that than you have. But what you can do is you can study her well enough to know how she experiences honor and how she experiences love, and then provide that. And the uniqueness is that every woman is different, and so how she experiences honor and how she experiences love is going to be different from someone else. And so you'd be like, well, this is what I did, to tell my mom that I loved her. And it's like, well, she's not your mom, so that's weird. And so don't treat her like that. And so then take out the things that she experiences dishonor and put in those things that she experiences as honor. And if you'll do that, that will greatly simplify her story. That will lower her stress, her ability to handle the ups and downs of life, her ability to be. And so, like, if you're a young guy here and you're like, my mom's yelling at me all the time, she's always yelling at me. So the reason, and she may not be doing it really well, and she may not know how to communicate to you effectively, but really what she's doing is one version of you're either not working, so you're not doing your homework, you're not cleaning up around the house, you're not demonstrating the ability to leverage your energy to be productive, or you're not figuring out how to honor well, and she's afraid of the man that she's developing, and so she's responding to you, but she may not be doing it right, but that's what she's doing. And so study that and figure that out so you can figure out what can I do to better display honor in this environment. And so to me, that's the second thing. And then the third thing is really kind of covers all of this stuff, and to me is the most important thing. Like if you can figure this thing out, I think girls are fairly simple if you can figure this third thing out. And not simple as in, aren't they simple? But they're simple and as in it's very easy for them to love you well and be home and to provide an environment that's really enjoyable to live in. This last little trait is young men, just love Jesus like crazy. Just love him like crazy. And like for some reason this is weird for guys, and I don't necessarily understand why it's weird, other than like we don't talk to each other like that. Like I don't ever come up to another dude and say to another dude, hey, I just want to love you like crazy. Like we don't talk like that. And so it might be a little weird to us because we see Jesus is a man and I don't want to be in love with a man. That's kind of weird. And so like maybe we don't understand what that means, but it means the lordship of Christ and honoring him and following him, obeying and submitting to his rule in our life. Like one of the most simple things that you can do to make your home so peaceful and to make it so easy for your wife to dwell with you and to make home very peaceful is for you to just be in love with Jesus just ridiculously. And so that who you are in public is who you are at home, and she has the assumption that you're going to do right because at the end of the day she knows you just love Jesus like crazy. It should not be hard to go to church. It should not be hard for you to read your Bible. It should not be hard for you to pray. It should not be hard for you to serve and to give and all those kind of things that are kind of part of the disciplines of a relationship with God. It should not be complex for you. Just do that. Just love. And we're very deterministic guys. We're very volitional, I should say, and so it's very easy for us to make kind of simple decisions, and so just make a decision to love Jesus like crazy. Just love Jesus like crazy. And if you'll do those three things, young men, girls, I know it's really weird because we don't think like this, but girls find that stuff ridiculously attractive. I know, like we don't walk around and be like, I got to find the person here. We just like, who's hot? Like, this is our simple brains. Like, we're really kind of simple that way. But girls aren't. They have a much larger look at the world. And the things they're looking for does he know how to work? Like, can he turn a video game off and actually mow the grass? Does he have that ability? Can he work? Does he possess the capacity for labor? Will he work? And does he work at home? And does he understand that? Does he honor? Like, does he know what that looks like? Can he study? Does he study the ladies in his life to figure out how to honor them? And will he do that? And then does he just love Jesus like crazy? And guys, like, if you look, like, especially young men, this, like, what you're offering, like this attractive thing that you're offering, like, I'm a good looking guy. Hey, there's no such thing in the world. Like, men are hideous. We're not really offering, guys, you know that, right? You've looked in the mirror, right? You've seen the mirror. What's looking back at you is no form of beauty. Y'all go get you one of those magnifying mirrors and go look in front of that and see how long you can stay there until you go, oh, I gotta go. And this is nothing really special that we're offering. And so what connects to a girl's heart are those three things. Just love Jesus like crazy. Insanely love him like crazy. And be easy to walk with God. And then learn what honor looks like and do it. Like, figure it out. What blesses her heart? How do I do this? How do I create this environment? And then create that environment. And just say, well, I'm not good at it. Okay, figure it out. You're not diminished. You can figure it out. Just study her. Figure it out. And then just work hard in your job, work hard at home, and you create that. It's good. When I say love Jesus like crazy, if you're here, and lots of times on Mother's Day we have lots of visitors, and you're here and you don't even know what that means. What it means is this. God created a perfect world, and in God's perfect world, sin entered into that world and wrecked God's creation. So you and I experience God's perfect creation in a broken reality. Sin has ruined this world for humanity. God, because he loved the world and you so much, sent his one and only Son, who lived in this reality, knew no sin, that means committed no sin, and died as a substitute, because the payment for being sinful is death. Jesus died, having no sin, paid for sin, our sin, with his death. He was buried, but he did not stay dead. He rose from the dead. His death, burial, and resurrection satisfies God's just demand for our sin, and God offers then to us an eternal relationship with him. This offer is contingent on his grace. That is, he chooses to give it to us because of who he is, not what we are or who we are or what we've done. It is an expression of his favor to us. It is God's grace and is received by faith. You can't earn it, you can't buy it, you can't serve for it, you can't clean up your life enough for it. You simply receive it by faith. And it's a prayer of faith where we call out to God and say, God, I know that I'm a sinner. I believe you died on the cross for me, for my sin, that you were buried and rose again. God, save my eternal soul. And he will do that. So, moms, on your special day, thank you for letting me talk about Jezebel. And thank you for being here. Thank you for honoring us. And thank you for letting me speak